Hey everyone, it's Adam from The Army Painter, and today I have for you a really exciting tutorial. Strap in because this is going to be a doozy. Today I really put the metallic colors paint sets to the test and pushed them to their limits on an exciting model from our friends at Games Workshop called the Void Dragon. So let's take a look at the paints and colors that we're going to be using today. I'm really excited to get started on this model and this project with you today and really show off the new metallic colors. So go ahead, grab your paints, your favorite brush, some airbrush medium, maybe even the Masterclass dry brushes and your wet palette, and let's get started. To begin, you're going to want to apply just a little bit of our airbrush mixing medium inside of your airbrush and then some of our Night Scales metallic. This is a new color from the Army Painters metallic colors range. And you're just going to take an old brush. I have an old regiment brush here that I've had lying around for a while, and I'm going to give it a good mix. You're going to want to thin this down a little bit more than you would your standard war paints, just because you want to make sure those metallic flakes are nice and thin down. I've just put a piece of paper down on my work area here just so I don't get any paint on the area, and very carefully I'm just going to begin applying a nice subtle base coat of the Night Scales all over the body of this model. Next, in a top-down fashion, I'm just taking some gunmetal and I'm going to airbrush this. This is called a zenithal highlight. And what I'm hoping to do and accomplish with this is just catch the raised areas. You can see how some of that Night Scales just sits underneath. So just in a very controlled motion, I'm going to apply this gunmetal from the top down. If you do remove some of the Night Scales, it's okay, because we are going to come back and do quite a bit of brush work later, and we are going to apply another highlight through the airbrush next with a much brighter color, because we really want, and what I'm trying to achieve here, is a nice almost liquid metal effect. If you don't have an airbrush at home, that's okay. You could pull off very similar effects by using a standard base brush, using maybe our regiment brush, or even using a dry brushing method. Just follow the same order of operations that we're going to do here today. And there you have the gunmetal. We're going to apply a coat of shining silver in the same fashion again from the top down. You can see just on the chest here how it really starts to jump out at you. We're going to follow this method down the thighs here, catch the bottoms of the feet, and of course the tops of the shoulders and the arms. You can see that we have just a nice, very simple but effective gradient happening from the Night Scales up to our shining silver. We do have one more highlight coming next. We're going to experiment with some more of our metallic colors paints. So just go across the model, find the raised areas, and go ahead and apply this highlight. Now I've mixed in a bit of our fairy dust effects metallic, and we're going to apply this in the same fashion, just focusing on the most raised areas of this model. We want almost a white metallic appearance here. It may take a couple light passes, and that's okay. Just take your time and build up that gradient nice and steadily. Now we're going for somewhat of a liquid metal effect, and the reason I wanted that Night Scales is just to give me an idea of where the shadows on this model are. We're going to go for a pretty cool new effect. This is something I've never quite tried before. I have my character brush here, and I love this brush because it's perfect because it has just enough detail, enough of a fine edge to work on these detailed areas, but it still holds quite a bit of paint. Now you can see here I'm taking some of our royal purple metallic, and I'm just applying that to that left side of that musculature shadow. And now with the Zero Magic, I'm going to go ahead and paint in the shadows. So we're doing this almost in the reverse order. We're painting in the shadows as opposed to painting in the highlights. So I'm just applying a very thin application very carefully here, and eventually what I'm going to do is I'm going to blend these two together somewhere in the middle. just to give this a nice, almost glowing effect. Not really glowing, but reflective effect, if that makes more sense. And don't worry, if you do paint outside the lines a little bit, you can just go ahead and grab some of the final color that we painted on with the airbrush and just apply that to clean things up in a later stage. So I'm going to repeat this step on all the areas that I want to have this nice reflection, like right here underneath the mask. I'm going to start with the purple up top. I'm just going to slowly work its way in like that. And then I'll go to our turquoise Azure Magic and just start blending those two together. You can really begin to see how this effect is starting to take shape on these rib muscles, these abdominal muscles. I still need to get down here on the belly of our Void Dragon. I've started a little bit here in the center on the sternum of this star god. Now you may be asking, how are we going to treat some of these softer areas, these softer muscles? Well, we're just going to thin down our metallic paints with just a little bit of clean water. And we're almost going to apply these like a wash, almost like a glaze. So I'm just making sure I get the right consistency on my palette here. I'm going to turn this model just slightly upside down. This is quite a large model. And let's just focus here for the beginning. This is the inside of the armpit, and you can see I'm just kind of feathering this thin down application of that purple paint underneath. So I'm just following the shadows that Zenithal highlight afforded us. Basically gave us the guidelines that we need to apply these shadowed effects with the different colored metallics. So this is actually pretty simple. It's not as difficult, it's not as advanced a technique as you might think it is. All you have to do is just take your time, and we're just playing with the paint, working it back and forth. This is my favorite type of painting because you're really just experimenting on the model, and you can see how you get that nice gradient from the purple to the turquoise while leaving that brighter whitish silver on top. So I'm going to replicate this here. You see the folds that he has in the elbow. So I'm just going to work those pigments into the folds. And you can see I just got a little bit on that bicep there. I could always come back with our base tone and just reestablish that, clean it up a bit later. And here I go with the turquoise, and I'm just blending these together and just really trying to give a nice, like I say, liquid metallic effect. I want to make this look like this is truly a living metal. If I'm being honest, that took a little bit longer than I thought, but it was a lot of fun painting in all of the musculature and adding some of the definition to the model. If you take a look at the model here, you can see how we got those purple to almost turquoise blends with our metallic colors from the Metallic Colors paint set. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and take a little bit of Quickshade Purple Tone. We're going to apply that pretty sparingly to certain areas on the model to just pick out some of the details before we go ahead and pick out some of the highlights on this Void Dragon. So I'm still using my character brush here, and I'm just going to find some of these areas. You have these little almost pixelated pieces around these areas on the model, and I'm just going to use my Quickshade Purple Tone to help pick out some of those details. So this is going to help me a bit when I go ahead and begin to highlight some of these areas a bit later, and it just helps to add some increased definition to these areas on the model. Now, if you'd like to, you can go ahead and find some of the areas that we previously painted and apply some of this wash into the recesses. It's just going to help with that definition and shading that we were able to, pull off before with the blending, and go ahead and just very carefully pick them out with a little bit of that Quickshade Purple Tone like so. Good area is to also take the toes here and just apply a little bit of a wash there. It's just going to help reinforce some of these details and redefine them. Another area that you might want to go ahead and apply this wash to is just right here inside the mask. We will be painting this a different color later, but this will help to just define that edge around the outside. Now that that wash has had time to dry, you can see on the model that the definitions of all those little pixels, those little squares, have really been pulled out. Now I'm going back to that mixture of our shining silver and a little bit of that fairy dust, and I'm just going to reinforce some of the highlights. We did do a bit of glazing and blending here, and I just want to make sure that the brightest areas on this model are really standing out. So I'm looking for areas like there on the pectoral muscle, and then of course here on the helmet or the face of the Void Dragon. What I'm trying to do is clean up these areas, and I just really want to ensure that the brightest areas on the model, these bright parts of this chrome effect that we're trying to pull off here, are really nice and clean. This is very simple. Another area that you'd want to look for is here on the shoulder blade. You can see that we've got some of the purple pigment from the blending. So I'm just going to go ahead and clean that up, make sure it's nice and bright. Down here on the arm at the bottom of the wrist. So you can see I'm just kind of pulling the brighter silver white pigments on top just to make sure it's nice and clean and we get that really sharp contrast on the musculature of this model. I've mixed a little bit of matte white from our standard war paints range into that mixture of fairy dust and shining silver, and I'm just going to use this to pick out some of the extreme details. Like here on the pectoral muscle, I'm just going to focus just a small line of this white mixture, and then on these pixels I'll just go ahead and pick out a couple little corners there, just like so, and this is just going to help to really highlight the model and really make it stand out. You can also take the edge of your brush around these exposed areas and just add a simple highlight by just tracing the perpendicular edge of your brush around these areas to really add some definition and detail. Now here on the top of the pectoral muscle, this is a great place to illustrate this. There's a small striation built into the model, so I'm just going to take a little bit of that mixture and I'm just going to pull a very simple highlight like so, and I'll just add a couple dots along the way just to really bring out some of the detail on this model. I think most of the body on our Void Dragon is just about done, so I'm going to go ahead and begin painting in some of the areas that I want to be kind of a goldish tone, and that's going to be these wings going around his back, of course the crown here, and I'm going to paint the spear that he has as well as his tail in this gold color to start. So I'm going to start by thinning down a little bit of Evil Chrome, and I love this color for basing golds. It gives a nice weathered bronzish look to it, and I'm going to take my regiment brush. This is my preferred brush for almost all things painting related, just because it's, you know, really good size and it holds quite a bit of paint and a nice tip as well. And I'm just going to go ahead and base coat these in very simply. Now I'm not too worried about how much paint I get inside of here because I will be applying some effects to that later at a later stage, so I'm just looking to get a nice smooth base coat to these areas that I previously mentioned. Now when we get up around here, and again the regiment brush, while it is on the larger side, still holds a nice tip, but you are going to want to be careful that you don't get any of this Evil Chrome on top of the white metallics that we've previously painted. So just very carefully go ahead and apply your base coat to the crown like so. Don't worry about these bits, we will be coloring them in a different color at a later stage, but it's fine to go ahead and paint them now. We are going to be applying some washes and dry brushes before we get to that point, so just go ahead and get a nice even base coat. Don't worry too much about covering up those details in this step. Right now we've got that layer of Evil Chrome down. I've taken a bit of bright gold and I've applied this to one of my masterclass brushes, and I'm just going to stipple this on the uppermost areas just to really bring out that bright gold that we want. We're going to be working in a transition here from the top down, and I'm going to start introducing some different washes and also maybe even some black tones, especially here and on the spear there. But for right now, I'm just going to start to stipple in some of this bright gold to really make this gold shine. And when I'm stippling, what I'm doing is I'm just taking my brush, I'm dabbing it a little bit into a piece of paper towel, and then I'm just taking the bristles and I'm just applying them by almost stamping them on gently. And I can apply this in layers and as much or as little as I want to create the gradient that I have just there. If I apply it lightly down here, you get just a lighter hint to that bright gold while leaving some of that evil chrome underneath. For here on the spear, I'm careful because this is a bit of a finicky area. It is rather fragile. I'm just going to very gently dab some of this on the tip of the spear like so. And then I can just feather it back just by applying lighter applications of it to the back. And when it does dry, you can come back and apply a second coat to the tip again. I've got a bit of our Quickshade light tone, and this is a nice almost sepia wash. And I'm going to apply this to all of the areas that we've previously painted with the gold metallics, like so. And in some of the areas I'm just going to stipple it. I'm going to come back with my brush and just kind of dab some of that wash on. And what I'm looking for is kind of a malted effect to the metal. You can see down here, and this will be a pretty good example. You can see how shiny these metallics are. I'm just going to apply it like so and make sure that that light tone is really focused down towards the bottom edges of these blades. This is really helping to give the illusion that we're going from a bright gold to a more brownish burnished gold. Once that light tone has had time to dry, I'm going to go with some flesh wash, and I'm just going to focus this on the lowermost areas on these pieces of gold, and you can see that it's giving us a nice transition here. Now, I am washing this and working its way into the recesses, but what I'm really trying to do is build up just some different layers of colors on these golds. You know, I'm actually applying this to the surface almost like a glaze, very simply. Now here on the crown, I'm just going to focus this down at the bottom. I'm just going to dab this on the way up top. I want to leave some of the initial colors to exist without interrupting them. Got a little bit too much of that wash. If it does begin to pull up a little bit too much, just take your brush and go ahead and wick it away. I've got some in the corner here. I'm just going to move that around because I don't want that wash building up too much here. Very simply like so. Best to work with it when it's still nice and pliable like so. Now here on the sword, what I'm going to do, or the spear, excuse me, I'm just going to focus this on the bottommost areas like so. I should say the bottom of that spear's blade, the spear tip, and on the inside, and then I'm just going to dab it on the way down the length of this spear tip. Just give it some nice texture. And I'll cover the entirety of the handle like so. All I'm going to do is go ahead and find the most raised areas on all of these gold bits, and with a bit of bright gold, I'm going to apply just a very simple edge highlight like so. Once you've applied the gold, you'll take some shining silver and just reinforce some of those highlights on the strongest tips and edges, like that. Like here on these wings, we'll just take that bright gold and very smoothly take the edge of the brush and apply a nice simple edge highlight. This is really going to help to make the model stand out on the battlefield by picking out these hard raised edges. I tell you what, I'm really starting to like how this Void Dragon is turning out. All of the metallics, for the most part, are pretty much done. So I'm going to recommend that you go ahead and clean out your rinsing cup because you don't want any of the metal flake to contaminate the standard acrylics war paints that we're going to be using in the next parts of this tutorial. We're going to move on to painting in the blocks that are suspended in air, and on the base we're going to paint them a nice bluish turquoise color to kind of fit in with this alien metallic robotic theme. And then we're going to paint the lightning strikes, and I think we're going to go for a neon green type color. So let's get right to it. So very simply here, I've got my monster brush, and I like this one because we're basing in some pretty big areas and we want to get the most coverage as possible and as smoothly as possible. I'm going to begin by applying 1 to 2, probably 2 coats of dark sky here. This is a nice, very rich blue, and what I like about this is that it kind of complements the turquoise that we have on the body of the Void Dragon here. So I'm just going to apply this to all of the rock areas that are suspended on the model by this magical lightning bolt that's kind of streaking around the model. Very dynamic pose. I'm also going to apply this to the areas on the base that feature some of these similarly shaped rocks that he's pulling up in the air to help him float across the battlefield. Again, we're going to apply this in 2 thin coats. That way we don't obscure any of the detail on the model. Now I'm going to mix things up. I'm going to grab, let's see here, I'm going to grab my character brush because we do have some areas on the model that we want to be painting in with similar tones, like these insets in the crown here. So I'm just going to apply a very simple light coat like so. Be careful not to get this on any of the metallic areas that you've previously painted. So I'm just very carefully, and the reason why I like the character brush for here, again, is that it does hold quite a bit of paint, but it holds a very fine tip for these fine detailed areas. Alright, so now that we've got our base blue tones, we're going to start working this up to a turquoise. I have my Masterclass Moderate Dry Brush here, and this is going to be perfect because we just want to start feathering in. We're going to leave some of that blue in the recesses. I've got some elemental bolt here, and I'm just going to load this up on the bristles of my Masterclass Moderate Dry Brush, and I'm just going to start feathering this in like so. So I want it to pick out the top and uppermost areas of these rocks that are kind of floating like so. So while I've got a more heavy application of this on the brush, I'll focus on the tops of these areas like so, and you can see how it's just picking out the tops and leaving the kind of blue and the darker tones in the recesses like so. So I'm going to work my way around the model here, focusing on the tops like so. And as the paint begins to kind of wear its way off the brush, this is almost like an overbrush which we're applying here, and that's when you have a little bit more paint on your brush than you normally would when applying a dry brushing technique. But as it begins to kind of work its way off the bristles, we're naturally going to have less pigment on the bristles. So then we can go back and really start to feather and fade this in. And that's what we're going to go, kind of the effect that we're going for here. Now you could also take this brush, and this is great for this technique, and just begin stippling like so. You get this really worn appearance to these rocks. But this helps to build up that natural gradient. This is a great indication right here as we kind of stipple this on the lower portions. And there's the beginnings of these rocks. Now we're going to apply a wash, and I've got my Quickshade Dark Tone again, and I'm just going to apply a wash all over these rocks. I really want to darken these down a bit, and we're going to come back and apply another dry brush of that elemental bolt to just reinforce some of this highlight, and this is going to give us a really nice natural gradient for these almost glowing majestic rocks. So just take your time here, go ahead and apply this all over. If you want to, you can just thin this down with a bit of water and just apply this. I'm using my Regiment brush here just because we have some smaller details. You could go ahead and use our monster brush as it's a little bit larger, but I like the Regiment brush because it's just going to give me a little bit more control when applying this wash over top of these rocks. Now while the wash is drying on the stones, I want to go back and I want to start introducing some of that turquoise to the stones in these kind of rock formations inside the armor here. So I've thinned down this elemental bolt quite a bit, and I'm almost treating it like a glaze. And I'm going to apply this in several applications. And you can see that I'm just kind of keeping it on the most raised areas. Just a very simple application like so. Oops. This is somewhat of a finicky model to hold, so you just got to do your best to get this nice and steady. So I'm just applying one simple coat now, and I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to come back and I'll reestablish these turquoise tones over top of our dark sky, this dark blue. You can see I'm just mimicking the shape of these stone formations inside of these golden bits here, just very simply, ever so slightly. Go back and just move them around a little bit, just to get them nice the way that you want to. Just kind of experimenting here, but you can see already, because we've applied so much water and we've thinned it down, it's drying very quickly, so we're going to be able to work with this quite quickly. So I'm going to focus the majority of this in the upper portion, and as I work my way down, I'm just going to feather it a little bit lighter on the bottom areas. I'll repeat this on the back portions of the model, like here. See, I've thinned this down. It's a very almost skim milk-like consistency. Once that's dried, we're going to go back and apply a second layer, and this is just going to reinforce that mottled effect. Now, you start with the paint down here, and you can actually pull the pigment up, and that's kind of what we want. We want this paint to pull upwards, and these pigments to pull upwards to get this gradient effect. If you feel like you've applied a little bit too much, just wet your brush down a little bit, and you can go ahead and move the paint around almost like you're applying a wash. Repeat this on the other side just to give you another example. I'm going to let most of the pigment come off at the top there because that's where we want the highest concentration, and then I'm just going to start pulling. You see, I start with my brush low, I dab some of that pigment off, and I'm going to pull it upwards because that's where we want the highest concentration of those pigments to settle. Now that we've achieved that gradient with the glaze, we're just going to go ahead and apply a wash in the same fashion that we did on the stones. And this is, again, just going to help to tie these colors together and add some definition for the later stages. You can see how it's helping to pick out some of the defined areas on there. So we'll go around all of the areas that we've applied this technique to, and apply just a very simple wash of Quickshade Dark Tone. Now that our wash has had time to dry, we're going to go back and reestablish some of that elemental bolt. And I'm going to start by just stippling. And when I say stippling, I'm just taking, and I'm going to try and illustrate this here, I'm just taking the tip of the brush and I'm moving it around ever so slightly in my fingers, between my fingers. And it's just going to apply a very simple and almost a textured highlight to the upper portion of these rocks, like so. So I'm going to do that around all of these stones that are kind of floating magically in the air here, just to bring out that elemental bolt, that turquoise color that we're going for a little bit more. Much the same way that we applied the first glaze of elemental bolt to these areas, these rocks that are kind of protruding from the metal, I'm going to take our elemental bolt and very carefully just kind of feather it in, again focusing on the uppermost areas and details that are kind of etched into the sculpt here. You could always go back and thin down your paint a little bit more to work on that glaze to really make that transition nice and smooth. But again, we are kind of going for a mottled look, so it's okay if it's a little bit textured, if it's a little bit rough. So just take your time here, just kind of playing with the paints, finding where we want those pigments to sit on the model, like so. I have a traditional dry brush. This is our hobby dry brush, and I like this because it has just a little bit flatter bristles, and I'm going to use those to just pull across with Kraken Skin. This is a really nice complementary color to highlight our turquoise with. And I'm just using the edge of the bristles to pick out the most raised edges on these stones here. I don't want to apply too much. I'm applying this very light just to pick out those corners. And this is a very simple way of applying an edge highlight to these highly textured surfaces. It's really helping to give the effect that I want with these rocks. And to finish off the stone areas along his wings and his helmet, I'm just going to apply a very simple edge highlight. I'm using a character brush here. I'm just going to trace this along the hard edges here. And in some of these areas, I might just pull that edge highlight back a little bit along the raised areas of the stones. Very simple, like so. And we have a really nice, clean effect going on there. I really like how that's turning out. Now I'm going to begin basing in all of the lightning that we have, these lightning effects that we have, and this gem on the eye of our void dragon. And I'm starting with moon dust. This is a nice yellow. It's a light yellow color. You could use white or another one, but because we're going to go for like a neon green look, it's going to be a nice base coat to apply, and it'll be easier to apply some of those green glazes and other effects that we want. So we're just going to apply a nice smooth coat of this all over the lightning bolt effects on the model. You want to be real careful here that we don't get any paint on some of the metallics that we previously painted, so just take your time. It's going to take a little while, but just go ahead and get a nice smooth coat all over the model. All right, now that we have that moon dust yellow base coat complete, we're going to go ahead and build up the glow effects. We're going to be using several colors for this, several different shades of green, and we're also going to be manipulating some glazing and also stippling techniques to get that nice glowing effect. So let's get right to it. So I've really thinned down some Warpaint's green skin, and I'm just going to apply this almost like a glaze. You don't want to worry too much if that yellow starts to show through. That's actually going to help us to achieve this glowing effect that we want later on. We're going to be working in several layers here. So just go ahead and apply this very thin down application, almost like a glaze, to all of the areas that we've previously painted in our moon dust yellow. Take your time here. You don't want to miss any of the areas, but just very simply and very quickly go ahead and apply this first layer of glaze. And now you can see what the glazed down version of these lightning bolts looks like. I'm going back to our moon dust, and this time with our miniature masterclass dry brush, and I'm just going to begin lightly dry brushing and stippling over top of some of the center areas. And I want to leave some of the dark green areas closer to the rocks, like so. But we're basically going to apply an all over dry brush of this color on top of the outermost edges, and this is going to help brighten it back up, and we're going to apply a second lighter glaze to these areas using some brighter greens in the next steps. So just carefully take your time. We're going to repeat this process probably 2 or 3 times in between the glazing effects that we're trying to pull off. Now, something I do want to help illustrate in some of these areas, you're not going to be able to get your dry brush in there, but on these areas like here where we have some of this glowing effect running into the rocks and the cracks, we're just going to go back and essentially apply a wash with a watered down version of that moon dust yellow. And then when we apply our next coat of green over top, it's just going to brighten that up a little bit. It's very, very simple stuff here. Here on the mask, we're going to apply a very simple effect similar to what we did on these inner rocks up there, and we're just going to focus it on the top and then just kind of stipple it down very simply to help build up that gradient. This is real simple stuff here that we're doing. Now we've worked up that healthy glow with our dry brush and stippling of the moon dust yellow. Now we can go back and we're going to glaze over top, this time with jungle green, and this is just going to be a slightly brighter application. You can see how it really shifts that green skin to almost a lime green when we apply it over top of that dry brushed yellow. We're going to do this one more time and then come back with a final glaze. So just take your time here and apply this all over the glowing green parts of the model. And you can see right here how we just apply this into the recesses around these rocks and crevices, and it gives a really nice, especially when it dries, it's a little wet here, but you can see how the yellow is still showing through at the top, while the darker green skin is sitting lower in the bottom. It gives a really nice, simple, and realistic glowing effect. I can see it's turning into that bright neon green that we really wanted. I went ahead and did the little back piece on his backpack here just to draw some visual interest. You can paint it whatever color you want. Actually, this turquoise would have been a nice choice, but we're going to now apply our final application of this dry brush glaze technique. I'm going back to our moon dust, and I'm just going to do the same thing that we did 2 steps ago, but this time I'm just going to focus it a little bit more on the most outer edges. That way I'm probably going to stop right about there on that piece, and I might bring some down here where this bend in this electrical current is taking place. That way when we apply our next color, which is Poisonous Cloud, it's just even brighter towards those extended pieces of this lightning bolt here. And that's what we really want. We want it to kind of blend in. You could pull this off with an airbrush just as simply, but I like the control that I get by dry brushing it, and I'm not getting any of that overspray. That might be something that you want, and some people do like that oversprayed OSL effect. And if that's what you like, you can go ahead and replicate that very simply with your airbrush right now. But I like the controlled look that we're going to have with the turquoise. I don't want to drown out the other work that we've been doing. So very simply, just go ahead and apply that dry brush of moon dust, this nice bright yellow. You don't want to forget this little bit right here. And again, we're just focusing this very gently in the center of these effects to really push that glowing effect. Again, I'll show you on this side, just like that. Very simple. This is very simple stuff here. And then on the back here, I'm just going to go back and get a little bit more of the moon dust. I'm just going to stipple this in the center and kind of feather its way down, really build up that bright transition right at the top. Turn it upside down there and apply the same technique on the other side. All right, now it's time to apply our final glaze to this lightning effect. And for this, we're using Poisonous Cloud. And again, we've watered this down quite a bit. You're not going to see a huge jump in transition here, but this is really going to push and tie those greens and yellows together for a really smooth green lightning bolt effect. So just very carefully and very smoothly apply one thin coat of Poisonous Cloud over top. And this is just going to help, like I said, to smooth everything out. We're really getting a nice glowing effect. You get those deeper, darker greens still kind of sitting in the recesses there. And then this brighter greenish yellow effect, almost neon green with the combination of colors that we use. This is, again, just a very simple way to get a glowing neon effect. We use a couple of, somewhat advanced techniques, but it's really approachable once you actually sit down to try and do it. You can be very loose and free here, and there's lots of room for error. You see, if I get a little bit of this paint outside of the lines, so to speak, and onto the rocks, I'm okay with that because it's just going to add to the overall glowing effect that we're trying to put together. We don't want this portion to take away too much from the overall effect that we have going on this model, because the metallic parts up here, that's really going to be the showstopper. We've already done that. So just have fun here. Go back and forth with your bright neon green and yellow colors to pull out a nice smooth energy glow effect. Now we're just going back to Moondust to pick out some simple highlights. So I'm just going to pick out some of these hard edges that he has on this visor, this all-seeing eye that he has going on here. Just very carefully, don't want to undo any of the work that we've previously done. We'll do the same thing to this gem underneath, this beating heart that he has here, whatever you call that. And just very simply just pick out a couple highlights like so. And on some of these pieces, especially like this spirally bit that he has on his hands, I want to make sure that I get some of that moon dust yellow in there just to really make it stand out. There you go. Really helps to pull off the effect that we're going for, that everything here is glowing. And then you can just pick out some random corners like so. And you don't have to be too precise here. We just want to highlight and really make some of these areas pop on the model. The light source is kind of coming from itself, so you don't have to be too concerned with getting your light source accurate here. We're just finding some of the shapes that the model gives us to really brighten it out. Very much rule of cool kind of stuff here. And if you want to highlight some of the inner parts around these rocks to really make that glowing effect stand out, just go ahead and do that with your moon dust yellow. Very simple stuff here. Basically just painting the way that you want to paint. You can add these highlights or not, it's really up to you, but I think it really makes that effect stand out and look really nice. So I'm going to go around the model. I'm just going to find a couple of these, tailed off little pieces here that are sticking out. I'm going to thin down my paint just a little bit more on my wet palette here. Some of these little nooks and crannies, we just want to find them, highlight them, really make them stand out. I almost forgot this little cable that's going on back here, so I'm just going to do a very simple wet blend from Alien Purple to Oozing Purple. I'm going to give it one coat of Alien Purple to start. And I could have picked any color here. I could have picked an orange color. I thought about doing maybe Mars Red, but I figured since we've got the greens shifting throughout this model and the turquoise and the blues on the metallics and then the rocks, we also have some of that purple metallic that we played with on the Void Dragon's body. So I figured purple might be a good color here. So I'm just very simply applying a careful base coat of our Alien Purple. We're going to give that a moment to dry. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just start wet blending to create a very simple effect. So when I say wet blending, what that means is I need to have two colors of paint on my palette. And for that I've got some of our Oozing Purple, which is a nice brighter color. And I'm going to apply that while that Alien Purple is still just a little bit wet. That's okay. It's kind of what we want because we're trying to wet blend. That's where it gets its name. We're going to blend these together while both paints are still wet. So I'm very quickly moving back and forth between my Alien Purple and the Oozing Purple, like so. Get some more of that Oozing Purple. And I'm just going to blend them into each other while they're still wet on the model, just like so. Simple, easy effect. Now if you wanted to, you could go back and if you have some white on your palette, you can add a little bit of that in at the very bottom. And again, just blend them all together. If you don't have a white on your palette, don't worry about it. It's really up to you how far you want to take this on the model. It is just one simple cable. And at the end of the day, we just kind of want it to complement the other colors that we have going on. We are almost finished with this model, and you'll have to forgive me because I got a little bit too excited. I jumped on to the next step. I'm beginning to base the model, and I did go ahead off camera and I began painting it. It's very simple though. All you have to do is apply a simple base coat of wet mud. And you can see here it's still drying just a little bit. I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to come back in and apply a dry brush. So very simply here, I've got some dry rust. This is another effects paint along with our wet mud, and I'm just going to apply a very simple dry brush just to bring out the rustiness, that rusty effect that I really want to have on this base. So I got some dry rust here and just my moderate dry brush from the Masterclass dry brush range. I'm just going to apply this very simply just to bring out that orange hue, that really rusty orange hue on the tips of the rocks and the base before we apply a wash. And the underdog color of this tutorial is in fact moon dust. Since I have this laying around, this is a perfect color to mix in with just a little bit of that dry rust to apply just an even more refined highlight. It gives it a nice yellowish orange appearance and really picks out the details on top. I'm just applying a very light application of this to the outer edges of these rocks. You can see the definition really start to take shape. Next, we're going to apply the light tone that we used a bit earlier. We're going to apply this all over the base of the model. So just take your time here. Be pretty loose with this, but you don't want to get this on any of the other areas of the model that we've painted green or in that obsidian turquoise color. So just be very careful, but make sure you work this wash into all of the nooks and crannies on the rocks on the base here. Now that our light tone has had a little bit of time to dry, I'm going to go back with some Quickshade Strong Tone, and I'm going to apply a more focused wash. And this is just going to go in over top of the little pieces of rubble here, in between the bigger rocks. And when you get to areas like there, where it's just kind of, they're both touching, you can go back, just add a little bit of water to your brush, and you can help blend it in for a nice smooth transition. And this is just going to add some extra definition to the lower areas of the base and really make it visually interesting. So again, we're just taking a little bit of Quickshade Strong Tone. I'm using my monster brush here because I can load it up with a heck of a lot of paint, a heck of a lot of this Quickshade wash, and really make some quick time applying this wash and adding this definition to the base. Now that the wash has had time to dry, I'm going back to that mix of moon dust and dry rust. Perfect color combination for this base, if you ask me. And I'm just going to use our vehicle and terrain brush, just the flat edge of this brush. I'm going to apply a very subtle dry brush highlight to the most raised edges, just to reinforce some of the highlights on this base. I'm going back to my airbrush, and I have a little bit of oak brown, and what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to add a little bit of a gradient of the brown and really blend it up to make it appear almost as if the light emitting from our, these glowing lightning bolts and et cetera, is casting the light across the shadows of the rocks. So very simply, I'm just going to apply a very light coat, just a very light pass from the bottom up. It's just going to add a nice simple gradient. I've thinned this down with our airbrush mixing medium. And this is going to add just a nice little depth and realism to the shadows of this giant figure. You can see it almost acts like a tint because I've thinned it down so much. We're just applying this in a very thin pass. Careful not to spray up. This is a very controlled spray. You can let that dry and come back and build it up until you're happy with the gradient that you achieve. We're almost finished. Before we finish off the final steps, I'm just going to go ahead and apply black trim around the base. I'm just using our matte black paint and very carefully applying this around the rim of the base. This is really going to help it stand out on the tabletop. I'm just doing this now because we are finishing the base and I'm getting excited. This is one of my favorite steps, believe it or not, is applying the paint to the rim of the base because it means that the project is almost done. All we have left to do is that there's these little tiny robotic spiders all over the model and on the base, and we've left some of the greenish tint glow from the previous stages sit on those models. I've tried not to paint over them with the basing colors and everything like that. We're just going to go in and apply a very simple coat of metallic paint and a wash and call it a day. So just go ahead, carefully apply your black paint. You can save this for the very end if you want to. I'm just doing this a bit out of order because I was working on the base, but it's really up to you when you want to do that. But this is a very satisfying part just because it's so mindless, so brainless. You don't have to think too much. You just slap on that matte black war paint. So I mentioned those tiny little spiders. They're almost hidden on here, but here's one of them right here. I'm just going to apply some gunmetal, just very simply, very careful not to get it on top of the rest of the model. And you can see that there's almost like a little eye or a lens of some sort right in the center, and I'm going to leave that bit green from the previous steps, just like that. Just very careful here. There's another little guy, little gal right here on the base, and I'm just going to pop some gunmetal paint on it. We're getting very close to the finish, y'all. So just take your time here. Go around the model. These guys are kind of just hiding out, so make sure you find them all and apply that very simple application of gunmetal to them. And once your gunmetal has had time to dry, just go ahead and take some Quickshade Dark Tone and just apply a very simple coat around these little spider dudes. It's okay if you get a little bit of the Quickshade Dark Tone on top of that obsidian stone, because it's just going to act as a shadow on top of the base to cause some separation and really make these little guys, because they're kind of hidden, but it really helps them to stand out a bit. And finally, we're going to top it off with some tufts, and this is really going to complete the package. So I'm taking some scorched tufts, which I think are the right call for this base, because we are looking at, you know, a Martian almost landscape. And I'm just going to take them and I'm going to put them in a little bit of PVA glue and just find some interesting nooks and crannies on the base to apply these to. I might take one of the larger ones and just find a place for it to hide on here, maybe on this side right there. And I think about one more of the scorched tuft will do. We'll just put this one right snug in there. I'm also going to take some mountain tufts, and I like using one or two, at least two different variations of tufts when I'm finishing off the bases on my model, because they complement each other really well and add some, you know, some different texture, some different elements. And I like the way that these two play off each other. You can see right here they're a little bit darker and then a little bit brighter, but they both have that reddish, almost orange hue. So add some just visual interest to the base. So while I did 4 of the scorched tuft, I might only do 3 of these mountain tufts. Maybe I'll match it up and keep it even. I'll do 4. It's really up to you. You don't have to base it this way. You're more likely than not going to want to base this to match the rest of your army if you are an army painter like we are here. But if you're just a model painter and picked up this model, base it whatever way that interests you the most. There we have it. With any miniature, I always recommend that you go ahead and apply a protective coat. And our anti-shine matte varnish or Aegis Suit satin varnish are perfect for doing just that if you want to apply them with an aerosol spray can. They come from our Color Primer spray range. And if you do want to, you could also take some of our gloss varnish and add some visual interest by applying this to gems and other bits on the model if that suits your fancy. I sure hope that you enjoyed this tutorial as much as I enjoyed painting up this Void Dragon model for you today. I really enjoyed this because I got to explore a bunch of different techniques: dry brushing, wet blending, glazing, and even playing around with our new metallic colors, which are going for sale. You're going to find them in stores this weekend. So if you haven't pre-ordered them yet, be sure to go to your friendly local game store and see if they have it on their shelves. Remember that the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.